This is the story of a man the world called a legend, but behind the applause was a life carved from wounds, built in silence, broken by tragedy, healed by love, and tested again by time itself. Before you see the icon he became, you need to understand the battles he never let the world see. Every legend begins with a wound, something that touches a person so deeply that it follows them for the rest of their life, even before anyone knows who they will become. This is how his story starts too. People today know him as someone who reached the top of his field, someone respected, steady, admired, and considered one of the most influential names of his generation. His achievements made him a symbol of consistency and strength. His work shaped a whole culture, and many people saw in him the quiet confidence they wished they had in their own lives. That is who he eventually became, but his beginning was nothing like the life he later built. He was born in a simple family, with no special title, no guarantee of success, and no early signs that he was going to rise so high. His childhood was shaped by ordinary routines, everyday responsibilities, and the kind of life where people worked hard because they had to, not because they had dreams of fame or recognition. As a child, he was shy, observant, and careful with his words. He learned early that life did not always give comfort, so he developed the habit of keeping his feelings inside. Those who knew him as a boy said he had a calm nature and rarely caused trouble. He tried to do what was expected of him, and he respected people who worked hard. These early traits followed him for the rest of his life. The first major wound that shaped his path came in childhood. It was the type of experience that leaves a mark, even if the person never talks about it. For him, it was a moment that changed how he saw trust, safety, and family. A family separation, the loss of stability, or the sudden absence of someone he depended on created a fracture in his early world. When you are young, you do not have the experience to understand why people leave or why life changes so suddenly. You only feel the emptiness it leaves behind. That is what happened to him. The quiet in the house felt different after that moment, and it taught him early that life could shift without warning. This event did not just upset his childhood, it shaped his personality. It made him more private, more serious, and more careful about sharing his feelings. Instead of reacting loudly, he learned to deal with hurt in silence. Instead of complaining, he kept moving because he felt there was no other choice. From that point forward, he carried himself with a sense of responsibility that was not normal for his age. The emotional wound became a silent teacher. It pushed him to grow faster, work harder, and depend more on himself. Even years later, when he became a respected public figure, people could still sense that quiet strength in him, the kind that develops only from living through something difficult too young. He grew up in conditions that were not easy. His environment demanded discipline and hard work. The adults around him had responsibilities that left no room for excuses. So he learned early that if something needed to be done, you did it, even if you were tired or hurting. There was no luxury, no comfort, and no promise that things would get better. This shaped his work ethic long before he stepped into his career. People from similar backgrounds often learn the same lessons, that life doesn't reward laziness, that complaining doesn't solve anything, and that strength is something you build, not something you're born with. He absorbed these lessons every single day. At the same time, he also grew up with a deep sense of loyalty. The fracture in his childhood pushed him to value the relationships he still had. He became protective of the people around him, and he developed a strong sense of commitment. When he cared about someone, he stood by them. He didn't walk away. This would later become one of his defining traits as a partner, a friend, and even a public figure. People trusted him because he knew how painful it was when someone important disappears. He didn't want to be the person who caused that feeling in anyone else. There was also something inside him that set him apart from other children, even before he fully understood it. It was a quiet determination, a belief that he had to make something of his life, even if he didn't yet know what that something was. Many people experience hardship and grow bitter or hopeless because of it. But a small number of people develop something different, a type of internal fire that pushes them to rise above their surroundings. He was one of those people. Every difficulty he faced in childhood, instead of weakening him, made him more resilient. He didn't know it at the time, but he was building the strength he would one day need to face much bigger battles. As he grew older, the contrast between who he was expected to become and who he actually became started to take shape. No one around him imagined that he would one day stand in front of huge audiences, break records, and be loved by millions. His early life suggested he would grow into an ordinary man with an ordinary job. But the hardships he faced gave him something more valuable than early talent. They gave him the mindset of someone who refuses to quit. He didn't have special advantages, but he developed discipline, patience, and emotional endurance. Even in his childhood, people noticed that he didn't give up easily. He took responsibilities seriously. He paid attention. He learned quietly. These traits formed the foundation of his future success. There were no dramatic signs pointing to greatness, but greatness was forming inside him slowly, shaped by pain, silence, and resilience. His emotional wound did not destroy him. It shaped him. It created strength, depth, and sensitivity that would later allow him to connect with people in a way few public figures can. But the pain that shaped him was only the beginning, because the world had an even harsher lesson waiting just around the corner. Some dreams are born bright. Others begin in hunger, cold rooms, and nights when hope barely holds. His young adulthood was the second kind. As he moved from childhood into his teenage years and then early adulthood, life did not suddenly become easier. The emotional wound from his early years stayed with him, and now another challenge entered his life: the reality of survival. He did not grow up with money, comfort, or safety nets. When he became old enough to work, he quickly learned that every bill, every meal, and every step toward the future required effort that never seemed to end. He worked small jobs that demanded long hours, but paid very little. Hard labor became normal for him. He did anything he could find: lifting, cleaning, repairing, carrying. Jobs that most people avoided were the jobs he had to accept. Many days he came home exhausted, with barely enough energy to think about anything except making it through the next shift. Poverty didn't just affect his lifestyle, it affected how he viewed himself. When you grow up without much, you start to question whether your dreams matter, or if they are simply something life does not allow you to have. Still, he wanted more. He didn't know exactly what more looked like, but he knew he didn't want to spend his life doing work that drained him without giving him a real future. So he tried to find a path that felt meaningful. In his early adulthood, he experimented with different interests. He tried to enter fields like music, sports, or other creative areas, depending on where life was pulling him. He practiced late into the night when others were resting. He attended small gatherings, community events, or local opportunities where people with similar goals gathered. But these early attempts did not bring quick success. Instead, they brought frustration and disappointment. He faced rejection after rejection. Industry gatekeepers, people whose approval he needed, often dismissed him within minutes. Some said he didn't have the right look. Others said he wasn't ready. Some didn't even let him finish before declining him. These weren't kind rejections. Many were harsh, dismissive, sometimes even embarrassing. Each time he walked away from an audition, meeting, or opportunity, the same thought crossed his mind: maybe I'm not good enough. He wondered if the effort was worth it, especially when the outcomes felt so discouraging. During this period, he lived in unstable conditions. His room was often cold in winter and hot in summer. There were times he couldn't afford heating or cooling. He counted coins before buying groceries. Sometimes he stretched one meal over several days because he had no choice. He became used to sleeping in uncomfortable spaces, sometimes fully dressed because the room felt too cold. This wasn't a dramatic story he told others, it was simply his daily reality. The stress of these years also affected his personal relationships. When someone is constantly worried about money, constantly trying to chase a dream that does not seem to move forward, and constantly battling internal doubts, it becomes hard to show up fully in relationships. He tried to maintain friendships and early romantic connections, but ambition and insecurity created cracks. Some people felt he was too focused on his goals. Others felt he was not present enough. He often felt guilty, knowing he wanted to be better for them, but didn't know how. More than once, arguments happened because he had to choose between spending time with someone he cared about or attending another small opportunity that might or might not matter. Even when he had someone supportive in his life, he struggled with expressing his fears. He didn't want to seem weak or uncertain, so he kept most of his stress inside, carrying it silently. This made relationships even harder. People close to him sometimes misread his quietness as indifference, not realizing it came from pressure, not from lack of love. These misunderstandings left him feeling more alone than before. Small failures kept stacking up. It wasn't just one big loss, it was dozens of small setbacks that wore him down. A failed audition here, a bad performance there, a job he lost because of restructuring, a bill he couldn't pay on time, a night he couldn't sleep because worry kept him awake. Every setback added weight to his shoulders. At first, he believed he could push through anything, but as the failures kept piling up, even his confidence began to crack. He reached a point where the dream he once carried started to feel unrealistic. He began questioning everything: his talent, his future, his decisions, and his worth. There were nights he sat alone, looking at the life around him and wondering if he was wasting time chasing something that was never meant for him. Most people around him were taking stable jobs, building predictable lives, and trying to stay safe. He was doing none of that. He felt behind, lost, and unsure if he was being brave or foolish. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult period. Money was the lowest it had ever been. Opportunities were the smallest they had ever been. His confidence was the weakest it had ever been. One incident, maybe a failed meeting, a project rejected, or a job that fell through, finally pushed him past his limit. He felt something inside him collapse. He told himself that maybe life was trying to tell him the truth. Maybe the dream wasn't for him. Maybe he needed to accept a simple life, take whatever stable job he could find, and let go of the ambitions he once held so tightly. For the first time, he seriously considered giving up for good. Not just taking a break, but ending the dream completely. He imagined packing away everything connected to that dream and never trying again. He felt tired, defeated, and embarrassed that after all these years of effort, he still had nothing to show for it. It was the closest he had ever come to walking away forever. And just when he accepted defeat, a voice he trusted whispered the words that would pull him back from the edge. Every destiny turns on a single moment, one door that opens when every other has slammed shut. That was exactly what happened to him. After reaching his breaking point and deciding he was ready to let go of the dream he had chased for so long, he expected nothing more from life besides routine and survival. But life has a way of surprising people at the moment they feel most defeated. The person who changed everything was someone who believed in him more than he believed in himself. It could have been a wife, a partner, a close friend, a mentor, or even someone who had been quietly watching him struggle. This person noticed the pain behind his silence and understood that giving up was not what he truly wanted. One evening, after seeing the exhaustion in his face and the heaviness in his words, they told him something simple but powerful: try one more time. These words were not shouted or forced. They were spoken with calm confidence, the kind of confidence he no longer had. Something about hearing this from someone he trusted made him stop and think. He didn't suddenly become hopeful, but he agreed to try again, because this person believed he could still make it. Shortly after this conversation, an unexpected opportunity appeared. It wasn't a big chance. It wasn't something that instantly promised success or fame. It was small, almost easy to dismiss. But he felt that he owed it to the person who encouraged him to give it one last attempt. So he showed up. Maybe it was a local event, a small job, an audition, a community performance, or a meeting with someone new in the industry. Whatever it was, it didn't feel special at first glance. But this time, something clicked. People who had ignored him before suddenly listened. The person in charge saw something in him, something genuine, something raw, something real. They offered him a small role or a single chance to prove himself. It wasn't guaranteed. It wasn't glamorous. But it was more than he had received in a long time. He accepted it with a mixture of hope and fear, unsure if this would lead anywhere, but determined not to waste it. When he stepped into this opportunity, he gave everything he had. All the years of struggle, all the practice, all the quiet nights spent doubting himself came together. He didn't try to be perfect. He simply tried to be honest. And that honesty, shaped by hardship, caught people's attention. The small gig led to a slightly bigger one. Someone recommended him to someone else. Word spread that he had something unique, something worth noticing. This was the true beginning of his transformation from unknown to rising name. For the first time in his life, he felt momentum. It wasn't fast, it wasn't dramatic, but it was steady. People began remembering him. They asked him to return. They wanted to see more of him. The feeling was overwhelming. After years of being overlooked, suddenly there were people who believed he belonged in the industry he had struggled to enter. Emotionally, this stage brought conflicting feelings. He felt gratitude because he knew how close he had come to giving up. He felt disbelief because he had never imagined that one small opportunity could shift everything. He felt fear, too, because deep inside, he worried that it could all disappear as quickly as it appeared. Having tasted progress after so many failures made him protective of every new chance. He didn't want to lose it. He didn't want to disappoint the people who believed in him. But he also felt something else: renewed strength. The support system around him grew stronger. The person who encouraged him to try again stood by him as his schedule got busier. They helped him stay balanced, reminding him of who he was and where he came from. Friends who once comforted him during the tough years now celebrated with him. Even people who doubted him before began to show respect. Slowly, he started to trust himself again. As his confidence grew, so did the opportunities. A small performance turned into a larger one. A simple audition turned into ongoing work. People in important positions noticed him. Industry professionals who once dismissed him now called him promising. His name began to circulate in places that once felt unreachable. Each success made the next one a little easier. Each new connection opened another door. Nothing about this climb was instant, but it was unstoppable. He wasn't just getting lucky. He was proving himself with every step. People began to say things like, "He's going somewhere," or "He has something special." And for the first time, he believed it too. His early struggles, instead of weakening him, had made him stronger, more focused, and more disciplined than others. While many people entered the industry with confidence but no grit, he entered with grit but no confidence. Over time, the industry gave him the confidence he lacked, but his grit remained untouched. Success began building around him, piece by piece. His name started appearing on lists, schedules, and events that once felt out of reach. He learned how to navigate the business side, how to manage expectations, and how to protect his energy. With each passing month, he went from being a newcomer to someone whose presence mattered. More people wanted to work with him, and the offers grew. He never forgot the moment that restarted his journey, nor the person who pushed him when he was ready to walk away. Without that encouragement, none of this would have happened. It taught him a lasting lesson. Sometimes a single voice of belief can change everything. As his climb continued, his life began to shift in ways he never imagined. He had waited so long for success that he almost didn't know how to handle it when it finally arrived. But one truth grew clear with every new milestone. He was no longer living at the edge of giving up. He was now moving forward with purpose. But the higher he climbed, the heavier the price, a price he would soon be forced to pay. Success lifts a man into the light, but the shadows behind him grow longer than anyone can see. As his career climbed higher, everything around him began to change at a speed he had never experienced before. The small opportunities that once felt like miracles turned into major breakthroughs. His work started reaching wider audiences, and suddenly he was everywhere, on stages, on screens, on radios, or in articles, depending on his field. People were talking about him in ways he had once only dreamed about. Awards started coming in, invitations increased, and those who once ignored him now treated him like a rising star. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was standing in a place he had worked for years to reach. Crowds adored him. They celebrated him as someone who brought something special, and they pushed him even further toward the center of attention. But while the public saw him glowing in success, privately, the pressure was slowly building. Every achievement created a new expectation. Every hit or major performance became something he needed to match or surpass. The same people who cheered for him also demanded more from him. His schedule became packed. He slept less. He traveled more. He worked harder than ever, because now he wasn't just trying to make it. He was trying not to lose what he had gained. The industry around him added even more weight. Labels, managers, producers, or team members expected perfection. They wanted him to maintain the success he had started building. They asked him to say yes to almost everything because they feared losing momentum. And because he didn't want to disappoint anyone or appear ungrateful, he agreed to most of it. He didn't realize that while his reputation was growing stronger, his internal balance was growing weaker. Physically, the demands began to show their effects. Constant travel, long hours, and continuous performances or appearances put heavy strain on his body. He dealt with fatigue that sleep couldn't fix. He pushed through pain that required rest, but he didn't have time to stop. He ignored aches, injuries, or signs of health decline because he felt that success came with a price, and this was simply part of paying it. Some nights he went to bed with his body aching from head to toe, but he told himself that slowing down would mean falling behind. Emotionally, the climb took an even heavier toll. Even though he was surrounded by people, he often felt alone. Everyone expected something from him: energy, performance, answers, smiles, confidence. But very few saw the exhaustion he carried inside. Sometimes he questioned whether he deserved the level of success he was receiving. This feeling, known as imposter syndrome, appeared quietly but strongly. Even after delivering incredible performances or receiving major recognition, he would lie awake, wondering if he could keep it going, or if people would eventually realize he wasn't as strong as they believed. Along with success came jealousy and criticism. People within the industry who once ignored him now felt threatened by him. Some spread rumors, some questioned his talent, and some tried to compete with him in unhealthy ways. The higher he rose, the more people felt entitled to judge him. They criticized his work, his decisions, and even parts of his personal life. Some wanted to see him fail. Others doubted that he could maintain his position. All of this added another layer of stress on top of what he was already carrying. Rivalries formed without him wanting them. Controversies appeared even when he tried to stay quiet and avoid conflict. The public loved him, but the industry was mixed. With fame came exposure, and with exposure came scrutiny. Every small mistake became a headline. Every personal decision became a discussion. He tried to stay focused on his work, but the noise around him kept growing louder. Despite all this, he continued working. His discipline, shaped from childhood, refused to let him slow down. He believed that since he had fought so hard to get there, quitting wasn't an option. But he didn't realize that he was slowly burning out. He wasn't just tired, he was draining every part of himself mentally, physically, and emotionally. The spotlight that once felt warm began to feel heavy. The applause that once encouraged him now felt like pressure. There were moments when he looked at the life around him and wondered if the dream was worth the cost. He missed the simplicity of ordinary days, the comfort of anonymity, and the quiet moments without expectations. He felt guilty for even thinking this, because he knew millions of people would do anything to be in his position. But success changes everything. It gives you opportunities, but it also takes away parts of your life you never expected to lose. As the demands increased, relationships became harder to maintain. Friends and family saw less of him. Even when he was physically present, his mind was consumed with responsibilities. He felt disconnected from the people who mattered most. They supported him, but they could tell he was struggling. He tried to reassure them, but deep inside, he knew he was carrying too much alone. Ambition had brought him here, but now that same ambition felt like a chain. At one point, he experienced a moment of painful clarity. It was the realization that success was not just about achievement, it was also about sacrifice. He understood that to stay at the top, he would need to give even more of himself than he already had. He felt something inside him tighten, a mix of pride and fear. Pride because he had come so far. Fear because he didn't know how much further he could push before something inside him broke. He began sensing that the life he built was no longer fully under his control. It moved too fast. It demanded too much. The pressure didn't stop, and the expectations didn't slow down. And deep down, he felt that something was coming, something that would test him in ways he had never been tested before. And then, at the height of his reign, life delivered a blow so merciless it nearly ended everything. Some storms don't test you, they break you, remake you, and leave scars no one else can see. That is what happened to him when tragedy struck in a way he never imagined. Everything he had worked for, everything he had become, stood still in one single moment. No amount of success could protect him from the kind of pain that tears a life into before and after. The loss came suddenly. It could have been the death of someone he loved deeply, a life-changing accident, a betrayal he never expected, a painful separation, or the discovery of an illness that changed everything overnight. Whatever the form, the impact was the same. His world collapsed without warning. The day it happened replayed in his mind over and over, because moments like that don't fade easily. Even though he tried to continue breathing and functioning, he felt as if something inside him had been ripped away. Time slowed that day. He remembered the phone call, or the knock on the door, or the quiet words someone spoke. He remembered the sound of his own heartbeat pounding against his ribs, the feeling of his chest tightening, the confusion that turned into fear and then disbelief. For a few seconds, it felt unreal. Then, reality hit, and the pain arrived all at once, deep, sharp, and overwhelming. He didn't scream. He didn't collapse. He simply froze, as if his body needed time to understand what his mind already knew. The aftermath was even harder. Silence filled his life in a way he had never felt before. It didn't matter how many people stood around him or how many messages he received. Everything felt distant. He moved through the days in a fog, barely able to concentrate on what people were saying. Nights became long and difficult. Sleep didn't come easily, because his mind kept replaying memories and questions. He blamed himself for things he couldn't control. He wondered if he should have done more, said more, been there earlier, or noticed warning signs. Guilt became part of his grief, even if he didn't deserve it. His family felt the shock too. The people closest to him reacted in their own ways. Some cried openly, some withdrew in silence, some tried to stay strong for others. They looked to him for strength, but he didn't feel strong. He tried to comfort them even while he was breaking inside. It felt like every person in his home, carried a piece of the same pain, and every conversation reminded them of the loss. Fans responded with sympathy and support, but even their love couldn't soften what he felt. They wrote letters, sent messages, and expressed sadness for him, but he couldn't fully receive it. Their kindness meant a lot, but grief has a way of blocking warmth. When people asked how he was holding up, he said he was fine because that was easier than explaining the truth. In reality, he felt like he was sinking slowly into a place only he could understand. He still had work commitments, appearances, or performances expected of him, and because he felt responsible, he tried to show up. But this was the hardest part. Standing in front of people and pretending he was okay felt almost impossible. Sometimes he forced a smile. Sometimes he pushed through a performance with a heavy heart. Other times he stepped onto a stage or into a meeting and felt his voice tighten or his thoughts blur. He tried to stay professional, but inside the grief was always there, following him everywhere. There were moments when he broke down privately. Those were the moments no one saw. He cried when he thought no one was listening. He sat alone in rooms where the silence felt heavier than any sound. He questioned why life had taken something so precious at the moment he finally felt stable. He wondered what the point of success was if it could not protect the people he loved most. The tragedy changed his worldview completely. Before, he believed that hard work could solve almost anything. Now he realized that life doesn't work that way. Some things cannot be earned or controlled. Loss taught him that even the strongest people carry weaknesses, and even the most successful people face heartbreak. He became more reflective. He valued time differently. He cared less about public expectations and more about the connections he had left. He also became more protective of his family because he feared losing anything else. Relationships around him shifted. His spouse, if he had one, became both his anchor and his reflection. Some days they held each other tightly, sharing unspoken grief. Other days, the pain created distance because each person grieves differently. His children, if he had them, saw a different version of their father, quieter, slower, more emotional. He tried to shield them from the depth of his sorrow, but children can sense changes even when words are not spoken. His siblings reacted with their own grief, sometimes finding comfort together, sometimes pulling away because the pain was too overwhelming. Even friendships changed. Some friends stepped forward and became more supportive than ever. Others didn't know what to say, so they stepped back, unsure how to help. He didn't blame them. Grief changes the way people behave, and it changes what someone needs. At times he wanted company. At other times he wanted to be alone. No one could fully understand the depth of the loss, not because they didn't care, but because pain like this is personal. As weeks turned into months, he realized that grief doesn't go away. It changes shape, becomes quieter, but never disappears. He learned to live with it, to carry it instead of fighting it. He found small ways to honor the person he lost, or to accept the reality of the event that broke him. He moved slowly, step by step, never fully healed, but able to function again. But fate wasn't finished because loss has a cruel way of arriving again just when you start learning to breathe. When life wants to test a man, it doesn't strike. Once it strikes until he has nothing left to lose. After the first tragedy that shattered his world, he hoped the worst was behind him. He believed that no one should have to face that level of pain twice, but life did not give him that mercy. Instead, the years that followed brought a series of losses that pushed him to the very edge of what a human heart can carry. One loss came after another. A parent he deeply respected began declining in health and eventually passed away. Losing a parent cracks something inside you, no matter how old you are. It feels like losing the foundation that once held you up. Soon after, he lost a sibling or someone who had been like one to him. A person who knew his history, shared his laughter, understood his childhood wounds. That loss reopened every bruise from earlier years. Then came the passing of a mentor or role model, someone whose guidance once shaped his journey. Losing them felt like losing the map that helped him understand where he was going. Each loss was sharp. Each one took a piece of him he could never get back. He did not talk about his pain publicly. Instead, he carried it quietly, letting it build inside him. Silent suffering became his daily companion. On the outside, he still looked steady, but inside, he was breaking. Some days he felt lonely, even when surrounded by people. Some days he felt afraid of what might come next. Other days he felt anger not because he hated anyone, but because grief makes you question why life keeps taking the people you love. His emotions shifted constantly. He didn't know how to process so many losses at once. These losses also brought old wounds back to the surface. Relationships that had been strained or forgotten suddenly felt important again. He found himself reaching out to people he hadn't spoken to in a long time, trying to reconnect before it was too late. At the same time, old conflicts resurfaced. Pain has a way of reminding people of unresolved issues. Sometimes these reunions brought healing. Other times, they brought even more emotional weight. Not every relationship could be repaired, but he tried anyway, because grief taught him how short life really is. He made attempts to heal, but healing did not come easily. He tried talking to close family members. He tried throwing himself into work. He tried staying busy so his mind wouldn't wander to the empty places left behind by loss. For a while, these methods seemed to help, but the relief never lasted. On quiet nights, the grief returned stronger. When he was alone, memories came back without warning. He questioned whether he would ever feel whole again. Some days he woke up feeling determined to move forward. Other days he struggled just to get out of bed. It became a long, internal battle that required strength he wasn't sure he still had. As time passed, he began to gain small moments of clarity. These moments didn't erase his pain, but they gave him perspective. He started to understand that grief and love are tied together. You only hurt deeply when you have loved deeply. He realized that the people he lost had shaped him in ways he never fully appreciated while they were alive. He began thinking about forgiveness, not just toward others, but toward himself. He forgave himself for not being perfect, for not always being available, for not knowing how to save the people he lost. He also forgave those who had made mistakes, understanding that life is complicated and people often act from their own pain. Acceptance came slowly. It did not arrive as a sudden moment of peace. Instead, it appeared in small ways, in the ability to talk about the people he lost without breaking down, in the moments he felt grateful for the time he had with them, and in the gradual return of quiet strength. He learned to carry his grief instead of fighting it. He learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means finding a way to live with the memories. These losses made him reflect deeply on mortality. He began thinking about how short life can be, how quickly everything can change, and how important it is to value the people you still have. He thought about his own family, his spouse, children, siblings, and felt a stronger responsibility toward them. He wanted to give them the love he sometimes struggled to express in his younger years. He thought about legacy too, realizing that the true measure of a life is not just success, but the impact you leave behind on the people you care about. He understood that one day, others would tell his story, and he wanted that story to be one of resilience, compassion, and loyalty. All these reflections changed the way he approached life. He became more patient, more present, more thoughtful. He appreciated moments he once overlooked: simple conversations, quiet mornings, small gestures of kindness. Loss made him softer in some ways and stronger in others. It took so much from him, but it also reshaped him into someone who understood the depth of love and the truth of human fragility. Even with all this growth, the weight of grief never fully disappeared. It stayed with him as a reminder of everything he had endured. He learned to walk with it, but some days it pressed more heavily than others. He continued moving forward, rebuilding his life piece by piece, carrying the memories of those he lost as a source of strength rather than only sadness. Yet even after all the world had taken from him, fate had one more test, this time inside his own body. The most brutal battles aren't fought against the world, they're fought inside the bones, the blood, and the breath. After years of grief, pressure, and non-stop work, his body began sending warnings he could no longer ignore. At first, the signs were small fatigue that lasted longer than usual, a soreness that didn't disappear, or a stiffness that made simple movements harder than they should have been. He told himself it was nothing, just age or stress, something rest could fix. But rest didn't fix it. Each year, the small discomforts grew into more serious problems. Chronic pain became part of his everyday life. Sometimes it was in his back, sometimes his joints, sometimes his chest tightened enough to make him pause. There were mornings he woke up unable to stand fully upright. Some days he felt weak before he even began his work. Injuries that once healed quickly now lingered, reminding him that time was moving forward whether he wanted it to or not. Doctors gave him warnings: slow down, take breaks, protect yourself, but slowing down felt like giving up, and he wasn't ready for that. Eventually, the physical strain became impossible to hide. He had to cancel events or postpone appearances. Fans didn't always know the reason, but those close to him saw the truth. He wasn't just tired, he was hurting. He fought through discomfort because he didn't want to disappoint anyone, but eventually even he had to admit that his body was changing. For someone who built his life on discipline and consistency, accepting physical limits was one of the hardest lessons he ever faced. His spouse and children began stepping into a new role: caregivers. They noticed the way he winced when he moved, or the way he tried to hide his pain by changing the subject. They urged him to rest, to take care of himself, to let them help. At first, he resisted. He didn't want to feel like a burden. But over time, their care became something he depended on more than he expected. Simple gestures, a hand on his back, a warm meal prepared without asking, someone sitting beside him during a difficult night, meant more than any award he had ever received. These moments created a new kind of bond within the family. Instead of him being the strong one who always carried the weight, they took turns carrying him. They reminded him that love isn't only about supporting others, sometimes it's about letting others support you. His spouse would sit beside him when pain kept him awake and quietly reassure him that slowing down didn't make him weak. His children would check in, call more often, offer to join him at appointments. He felt their love in ways he never fully noticed before. But even with all the support around him, he fought an internal battle every day. He feared becoming irrelevant, especially in an industry that moves on quickly. He feared that fans would forget him if he took too many breaks. He feared disappointing the people who had followed him for years. The idea of losing his ability, the gift that carried him through life, frightened him more than he wanted to admit. It made him question his identity. If he couldn't perform the way he used to, who was he? Despite these fears, he kept going. He showed resilience that impressed even his doctors. He exercised gently, changed his routines, and listened more carefully to medical advice. But more importantly, he pushed himself to continue doing what he loved. Even when his body slowed him down, his dedication didn't. He walked onto stages or into workspaces with determination, reminding himself that age might change his strength, but not his purpose. Fans saw this resilience and admired him even more for it. They weren't cheering for perfection, they were cheering for his courage. Health scares became more frequent. There were nights when pain grew so intense that he felt frightened of what might happen next. There were sudden hospital visits when symptoms worried his family. Tests, treatments, medications, and long conversations with doctors became part of his life. During these moments, he faced the reality of his own mortality in a way he never had before. He cried privately after hearing difficult news, not out of fear alone, but because he wasn't ready to let go of the life he loved. These experiences brought emotional confessions he had never voiced before. He admitted his fears to his spouse, telling them how much he worried about failing the people who depended on him. He admitted his regrets to his children, apologizing for times he had been too busy or too distant. He admitted to himself that the strong facade he had shown the world for so long was beginning to crack. Surprisingly, these confessions didn't weaken the relationships, they strengthened them. Opening up allowed his family to see the real him, not just the version the world admired. There was one moment that nearly ended everything. During a performance or work event, pain hit him so suddenly and sharply that he almost collapsed. The people around him noticed the shift in his posture, the stiffness in his voice, the brief loss of balance. He steadied himself on whatever he could reach, fighting through the moment with everything he had. Anyone else might have walked off or called for help, but he stayed. He finished what he came to do, pushing through pain that would have stopped most people. It was one of the strongest and most vulnerable moments of his life, a moment that showed both his humanity and his courage. After that incident, he realized he needed to rethink how he approached the future. But he also realized something else. Even as his body weakened, his impact was becoming stronger. His experiences, his struggles, his honesty, and his resilience were inspiring others. People didn't love him just for his talent anymore, they loved him for his heart. Yet as his body weakened, something else grew stronger, a legacy larger than anything he could have imagined. In the final chapters of a life, the noise fades, and what remains is the truth of who a man really was. After surviving hardship, heartbreak, success, and illness, he entered a stage of life where he finally allowed himself to slow down. The world still admired him, but he didn't need that admiration the way he once did. Now, his attention turned toward the things that mattered most: family, peace, legacy, and the quiet knowledge that he had done everything he could with the life he was given. By this time, he had built significant wealth. Years of hard work, careful financial decisions, and steady success had created security he could never have imagined in his youth. He owned beautiful homes, not to show off, but because he valued comfort and privacy after decades of being in the public eye. Some properties were simple ranches where he could breathe freely and enjoy open space. Others were peaceful homes where he could rest, surrounded by memories and the people he loved. He had vehicles he treasured not for luxury, but for the memories attached to them. Even his planes or travel comforts reflected a desire to stay close to his family, making sure he could return home quickly after long trips. But wealth was never the center of his life. It was simply something he used wisely, something that allowed him to provide stability for his family. His true richness came from the relationships he had built and rebuilt over the years. His connection with his spouse deepened in these later years. They had stood beside him through heartbreak, pressure, illness, and joy. Now, they shared quieter moments, long talks, warm meals, gentle mornings, and evenings spent reflecting on their life together. They no longer rushed through life. Instead, they appreciated the small things they once overlooked. His relationship with his children grew even stronger. They were no longer just his kids. They were adults with their own families, their own stories, and their own challenges. He offered them advice when they asked, support when they needed it, and love without conditions. When grandchildren arrived, they became a bright source of joy. He felt a new kind of love watching them grow, laugh, and carry pieces of the family's history into the next generation. He promised himself he would be present, giving them the time he sometimes struggled to give during his busy years. Giving back became an important part of his life. He used his wealth to support causes he cared about, whether it was helping children, supporting communities in need, contributing to medical research, or honoring the memory of loved ones through foundations. He made sure his success had a purpose beyond himself. He didn't talk loudly about his charity work. He preferred quiet impact. He believed that real generosity didn't need an audience, it only needed sincerity. Many of the people he helped never even knew the help came from him. As he grew older, he also focused on planning for the future. He wanted his family to be protected and supported long after he was gone. Estate planning, trusts, and clear instructions became his way of ensuring that his wealth would be used wisely. But more than money, he wanted to pass on values. He wanted his children and grandchildren to remember the importance of humility, hard work, kindness, loyalty, and faith. He hoped they would carry forward not just his name, but the lessons he lived by. His daily life became softer and quieter. He woke up earlier than most, enjoying the stillness of morning. He took slow walks, prayed, or reflected on the chapters of his life. He appreciated nature more: the open fields, the sound of wind, the presence of animals, the calmness of the world when distractions faded. He found comfort in routines that brought peace: reading, listening to music, spending time with family, or simply sitting outside and feeling grateful for another day. In these moments of reflection, he realized how far he had come. The boy who once lived with pain and uncertainty had become a man who built a legacy of strength and love. The young dreamer who once doubted his worth had become someone who inspired millions. The man who once almost gave up had become someone whose resilience became a lesson for others. He understood now that greatness wasn't in fame or wealth, it was in how a person lived, how they treated others, and how they rose after being broken. He hoped those who followed his story would learn something valuable. He wanted them to understand that life is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to shape you. Hard times do not mean you are weak. They mean you are being prepared. Grief does not end your story. It teaches you how deeply you can love. Aging is not a loss. It is a reminder of how precious every moment truly is. And success is not measured by applause, but by the hearts you touch along the way. As he neared the later stages of his life, he shared a soft message with the people who had followed him for so long. He thanked them for walking with him through every chapter: the early struggles, the rise, the tragedies, the victories, and the silent battles he never revealed. He reminded them that even though the world knows him for his achievements, he is most proud of the love he gave and received. He encouraged them to care for their families, to forgive quickly, to live honestly, and to never underestimate the strength that lives inside them. He wanted his audience to leave with hope. Hope that no matter how difficult life can be, there is beauty waiting on the other side of pain. Hope that every person can build a legacy, even in small ways. Hope that peace is possible when you let go of what no longer serves you and hold tightly to what truly matters. And as the story closes, one question remains: not about the legend he became, but about the legacy he leaves inside each of us.